My name is Dana Myers. I'm 26 years old, and for most of my life, I felt like a guest in my own family. Not abused, not abandoned, just managed. Positioned carefully at the edges of photos, conversations, holidays. Close enough to belong on paper, never close enough to matter. But the worst moment of my life happened on Thanksgiving night in front of 25 relatives, under crystal chandeliers and polished silver, while the smell of roasted turkey still hung in the air. My mother stood at the head of the table, lifted her wine glass, looked directly at me, and said with a calm little smile, "Time for the truth, Dana. You were never supposed to be part of this family." My sister Stephanie actually smiled. My father lowered his eyes and said nothing. And then my dying grandfather slammed his fist onto the mahogany table so hard, 3 Waterford crystal glasses shattered across the china. Enough. The room froze. His voice turned to ice. "The truth isn't about Dana. The truth is about you, Victoria." Then he slid a thick manila folder across the table. Inside it was everything my mother had spent 26 years trying to bury. And by the end of that night, the person they tried to erase from the family wasn't me, it was them. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a 6,200 square foot colonial, filled with old money and older expectations. My father, Patrick Myers, was an estate attorney. My mother, Victoria, ran charity boards and fundraising galas. My sister Stephanie was the golden child from birth. Stephanie got the larger bedroom with the bay windows. I got the smaller room facing the driveway. Stephanie had a 30-person Sweet 16 with a live band and custom cake. I had a grocery store, sheet cake, and 4 guests. When Stephanie turned 18, Dad bought her a BMW with a red bow on top. When I turned 18, I bought myself a used Honda Civic with money from library jobs and summer shifts. Every difference came wrapped in a reasonable explanation. She's older. She has responsibilities. She needs more support. After a while, you stop arguing with unfairness when it's dressed politely. But the older I got, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something deeper was wrong. Every family photo showed the same pattern. Stephanie looked exactly like my parents. Same blonde hair, same jawline, same smile. I had dark red hair and brown eyes. I looked like nobody. When I was 18, I finally asked my mother during a drive back to Yukon, "Why don't I look like anyone in this family?" She laughed lightly. Eyes still on the road. "Genetics. Ah, funny, Dana. Some questions are better left alone." That answer stayed with me for years. Like a splinter under the skin. Small. Invisible. Impossible to ignore. Thanksgiving always made it worse. For a year, Grandpa Edmund sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Stephanie sat beside him in the seat of honor. Mom sat on the other side. Dad nearby. And me? Seat 12, at the far end near the kitchen door. Close enough to help serve. Far enough to disappear. One Thanksgiving in 2019, Grandpa looked at my mother and asked, "Why is Dana always seated down there?" Mom smiled immediately. She likes the privacy. Grandpa looked at me for a long moment after that. Something changed in him. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Everything finally started. Cracking in October 2025. Grandpa had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Weeks left. Maybe 2 months. The family suddenly became very interested in planning, which was really a polite word for inheritance. Dad held meetings in his office, surrounded by folders labeled estate planning and contingencies. Stephanie started calling me constantly. At first the calls sounded supportive, then strategic. "You're young, Dana. You don't need complicated trust structures. Maybe taking a buyout would make more sense. Maybe stepping aside would simplify things for everyone. I recorded every call, not because I was paranoid, because too many people in my family liked rewriting conversations after they happened. 9 calls in under a month. 7 directly mentioning me giving up inheritance rights. Then came lunch with my mother. That was unusual enough to make me nervous. Halfway through salmon and untouched salad, she leaned back and asked casually, "Have you ever been curious about your biological roots?" The sentence hit me like cold water, not because of the words, because of the timing. She was planting something. A week later, Stephanie emailed me, "Thanksgiving seating arrangements. Seat 12, near the kitchen, again. Easier for serving." The night before Thanksgiving, Mom texted me, "Wear something appropriate tomorrow. The whole family will be watching you." I stared at that message for 10 minutes. The whole family will be watching you. Not, "We're excited to see you." Not, "Love you," watching you. Like an audience waiting for a performance. I arrived at Grandpa's house in Darien at 4:50 p.m., Thanksgiving Day. The house smelled like chestnut stuffing and cranberry sauce. Grandpa answered the door himself, wearing his old Brooks Brothers suit and Rolex day date. His body looked weaker. His eyes didn't. At exactly 6:15 p.m., Mum tapped her fork gently against her wine glass. The room went silent. "I need to say something before dinner begins." She stood there smiling softly, performing sadness. This family was built on honesty, on legacy, on blood. Then she looked directly at me. "Dana, you were never supposed to be part of this family." I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. My chest went numb. Mom continued, voice trembling in perfectly rehearsed places. "I carried this secret for 26 years because I had no choice. But with Dad's condition, we can't keep pretending anymore." I looked at Stephanie. She wasn't shocked. She was smiling. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You waited until now?" I asked quietly. Mom nodded like she was the victim. "You deserve the truth." I stood up to leave, and Grandpa exploded. His fist hit the table like a gunshot. Crystal shattered across the plates. "Enough." Nobody moved. Grandpa slowly slid a 2-inch thick manila folder across the table. The label read, "Evidence. Do not open until November 27th, 2025. Mom's face lost color immediately. Grandpa looked directly at her. "You want to talk about truth, Victoria? Let's talk about your affair." The room stopped breathing. He opened the folder. Inside was a DNA test, proving Patrick Myers was not my biological father. Dad stared at the report like he couldn't process the words. Mom tried speaking. Grandpa cut her off instantly. Then came the private investigator's report. Former FBI investigator. 38 pages. Timeline of a 9-month affair between my mother and Richard Harrington, one of Dad's hedge fund clients. Dates, hotels done emails, transfers, everything, Stephanie. Whispered, "You knew." Grandpa ignored her. He pulled out printed emails next. One dated April 20th, 1999, 3 weeks after I was born. He read it aloud. "Richard, I need the $85,000 we discussed. Patrick can never know. If he finds out I cheated, I lose the trust fund. His family set up for me." The silence afterward felt violent. Then Grandpa placed the final document onto the table. A cancelled check, $85,000, from Richard Harrington to Victoria Myers. Memo line, personal settlement. Dad finally looked at my mother. "You took money from him." Mom stood abruptly. "This is private." Grandpa's voice went cold. "No. What was private was your affair. What became my business was the way you used an innocent child as insurance for 26 years. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I'd spent years starving for. Pride, not pity, not obligation. Pride, he said quietly. Dana is innocent. She didn't ask for any of this. But tonight, all of you showed me exactly who you are. Mom left first. Walked out carrying her Birkin bag without saying goodbye. Stephanie locked herself in the upstairs bathroom crying. Dad sat motionless at the table, like the entire foundation of his life had collapsed underneath him. Most of the guests fled within an hour. By midnight, Grandpa called me into his study. He handed me a brass key. Safety deposit. Box, he said. Everything you need is inside. I asked the question I'd carried for years. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He looked exhausted. Because I needed to know who they were, and who you were. The next morning, I went to the Bank of Hartford. Inside, the box was everything. The original DNA report, the investigator's file, USB drives filled with emails, audio tapes, stock certificates, a deed to a cabin in Stowe, Vermont, and an 8-page handwritten letter from Grandpa. I sat in my car and read it 3 times. He wrote that he first suspected something was wrong at my 10th birthday party when my mother forgot candles for my cake, but remembered Stephanie's. He wrote that he noticed every slight, every cold shoulder, every seat at the far end of the table. Then came the line that broke me. You were the only one worth saving. I cried in that parking lot for 20 straight minutes. Not because I learned my father wasn't biological, because someone finally saw me clearly and chose me anyway. Grandpa died 5 days later. I was the only person beside him when it happened. At 4:16 a.m., he opened his eyes one last time and whispered, "You're free now." Then he told me he loved me. At 4:18 a.m., he was gone. The will reading happened 2 weeks later in my father's law office. Victoria received nothing, not $1. Stephanie received $250,000 and a no contest clause. Dad received his inheritance, only if he divorced my mother within 60 days. Then, Eleanor Pritchard turned toward me. To my granddaughter, Dana Elizabeth Myers, Grandpa left me the Vermont cabin, his late wife's jewelry collection, Apple stock, a trust fund, and full repayment of my student loans. Then Eleanor read Grandpa's final note aloud. Dana is the only grandchild who chose integrity over convenience, grace over cruelty, and truth over greed. She is the only one worthy of the Myers name. Nobody spoke afterward. There was nothing left to say. The fallout came fast. Mom filed for divorce. Days later, after realizing the family trust was never truly hers. Stephanie lost her finance job. After the scandal leaked publicly, Dad lost his biggest client. $12 million in accounts disappeared almost overnight. For weeks, Dad texted apologies. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I answered once. I know. That was it. Then I blocked everyone except him. And eventually even his silence felt easier than their guilt. A few weeks later, Richard Harrington asked to meet me. We met at Starbucks on Greenwich Avenue. He looked older than I expected, smaller. He apologized for everything, the affair, the money, the cowardice. I let him speak for exactly 18 minutes. Then I told him the truth. You can't undo 26 years. You can't give me a childhood where I felt wanted. He asked if there was anything he could do. I said yes. Leave me alone. And he did. In January, I drove to Vermont and stayed at the cabin Grandpa left me. Cedar walls, stone fireplace, snow-covered mountains outside every window. Peace. Real peace. I found a photo album there. filled with pictures of me from childhood through adulthood. Every photo labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, my real granddaughter. That sentence healed something in me no amount of money ever could. One night I sat by the fire, rereading the final page of his letter. You're free now. Not because of the money, because you know the truth. And that's when I finally understood something. The worst part of my life was never learning I wasn't biologically related to my father. It was spending 26 years believing I was hard to love. Grandpa gave me the one thing nobody else in that family ever did, proof that I wasn't the problem. 2 months after Thanksgiving, my mother had lost everything she spent her life protecting. My sister lost her career. My father lost his reputation. And me? I was sitting on the porch of a cabin in Vermont, with no debt, no lies, no obligation, and the first real sense of peace I'd ever felt. Grandpa used to say, "The only inheritance that matters is integrity." He was right, because blood doesn't make people family. Money doesn't either. The only thing that matters is who still chooses you after the masks come off. Mom chose greed. Stephanie chose convenience. Dad chose silence, but Grandpa chose me.